Hey everybody, this is Stu Smith with another Two Through and After series with a special guest, Dr. Mary Beth Janke. And I wanted to give you a really good introduction before I say welcome, but because here's why. Former U.S. Secret Service agent, international personal protective agent, self-esteem mentor, doctor of clinical psychology, forensic psychology expert, college professor, and now author. So that's a long list, and I hope we can squeeze all that in this Two Through and After series. But anyway, welcome, Dr. Mary
Yeah,
Beth.
hey, Stu, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So as this little show goes, it's really about your journey, and why you wanted to serve, um, your journey while you were serving, and what you're doing now. That's kind of as simple as it is. Two Through and After
Right.
is the name of this thing. So
Cool.
so who are you, Mary Beth? Um, or you go by MB?
I do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
MB. I like MB. Um, so who are you prior to joining government service?
Yeah. Wow. That's a big ball of wax. I mean, I'm one of seven kids
Oh,
in my
fun.
family. Yeah, from a suburb of Chicago.
Did I
Uh,
see you have one brother?
One brother, he's the first child. So you can imagine, right? So, like, woohoo, boy. And it's like girl, 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 girl. And the first five of us, meaning starting with my brother, the first five of us are literally 1 year apart.
Wow.
I was in high school we had a girl in each. When I was a freshman, there was a girl in each year.
Oh, fun.
So it was the first five of us. And then 3 years later, my next sister, and then 5 years after that. So my youngest sister is 8 years younger than I am. And, when I talk about and have analyzed a little bit my own life, I feel like birth order was a big part of who I've become. And I think that's true of a lot of people.
Hmm.
And I say that because as the fifth child of, all athletic, bright siblings, it got ridiculously annoying to walk into a classroom the first day and say, oh, my maiden name is Wilkes. Oh, another Wilkes. Are you as smart as your siblings? And I'd be like rolling my eyes inside going, no, but I'm more fun, or more, no, but I'm cuter, or no, but, just because I got defensive. And so I feel like a lot of what I've done in my life was to distinguish myself from them.
Hmm.
Like they all played tennis in high school and I played volleyball. I am taller than all of my sisters. They all took German, which I thought was ridiculous and a waste of time. And I took Spanish. And Frau Schultz, who was the German teacher at our high school, was like literally pissed off at me and came to talk to me. And she's intimidating. She was as wide as she was tall. And I was like, with all due respect, this is what I remember, but I feel that Spanish is going to serve me better in my life, which is 1,000% true. When you'll get through my book, you see some of the
I
mission.
saw that. I
Yeah.
saw that you were the subject matter expert there for things
Yeah.
that you were doing. Yeah.
So in saying all that, I feel that, a career in law enforcement very much distinguished me within my family, but that decision was made when I was a junior in high school. And I chose this elective, which was sort of random because we didn't always have electives in our high school, but it was a criminal law class. And the guy that was teaching one day was talking about different facets of law enforcement. And I remember sitting there going, oh my God, I know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to be a federal law enforcement agent. And next thing you know, it was Mary Beth's going to be an FBI agent. So, for 4 or 5 years, interestingly, in my father's company, there was the retired FBI agent who ran the Chicago office. And so at least once a year in the summer, I would trot my little butt down on the L from our house and go have lunch with my dad and speak with a man named Marlon Johnson, who was, retired from the Chicago field office. And we would chat and I would ask questions. And if he couldn't answer them, he'd put his phone on speaker, he'd dial the Chicago field office, and he'd say, I have this young lady here who aspires to be an agent. She has a question I can't answer. And so really starting with him made it seem like this was doable, And then after college, I had studied my second semester junior year in Seville, Spain, and I loved it. But once you start learning a language, you realize how little you don't know. And I got this hunger to know more. So I told my parents after I graduated college, I go, I think I'm going to go spend a summer in Spain because I want to be more bilingual. And I spent 3 more years.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. And so when I came back, this is when I, made this decision. I was like, you know what? I'm kind of like, I've had it, meaning as far as doing the teaching English, interpreting and translating, and I was getting a little bored. I did a ton of traveling, never bored of that. But I came back to the States after 3 years. And then that's when I got a job in DC and I applied to the Secret Service and the DEA. Not, at the time, now there's, I'm so aware of so many more agencies, but at the time it was kind of like the FBI, the Secret Service, the DEA, the ATF, like kind of like a small group that we knew about.
Sure.
And so I did apply to those two. And listen, I would have gone with whoever called me first. I got to be honest, but I am relieved in hindsight that it was the Secret Service, because I think the DEA, with my Spanish skills, would have been whipping me all over Central and South America and potentially in some, shitholes and not so safe situations that at the time in my 20s, I would have thought was awesome. Yeah. But who knows what it would have brought. It's a different level of agent. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and a different mission altogether.
Totally. Yeah. So I feel like that's sort of my path to the Secret Service. I was always an athlete. I was a pretty solid volleyball player. I was a junior Olympic volleyball player, and kind of always a tomboy, always challenging the boys. And so kind of not so intimidated by the man's world that federal law enforcement or law enforcement in general presented.
Now, do you remember the fitness test you had to take for the Secret Service?
Yeah.
Was it rather challenging, or were there things you had to work on to be competitive? What was going in your mind when you were?
In my head, Stu, was kind of like, the sit-ups, the push-ups, the sit and reach, which is just so funny to me.
Yeah,
like,
touch your toes.
Push-ups, pull-ups, and then the 1 mile or 1.5 mile run.
Right,
I can't remember which one.
Pretty standard
amount of time. Yeah. And it's you're always super nervous because you want to do great and look like you're super qualified, but I don't remember it being like torturous.
Good. And most athletes don't have a problem with that.
Right.
If you train regularly, these fitness tests aren't going to crush you. Now,
Correct.
The only difference is like if you really are in a highly competitive, job category that you're going for, and then you might want to train a little bit more specifically for those tests. But typically, if you're coming from an athletic background and busy all the time with some form of training or journey, you're going to do well on these basic entrance exams.
And I think part of it, and this being having been a SEAL, is so much of it's up here.
Oh,
right. Like you'll kill yourself that day. You might lay in bed for a day after it, but you're going to do as many push-ups as you can, as many sit-ups. You're going to kill yourself. You're going to run all out. You're going to run all out for however long that is.
Oh yeah. You should be throwing up when you're done.
Pretty much.
Just joking, but yeah, no, you should be giving it your all, because these things are competitive, and that's what I call phase 1 of tactical fitness is you got to get to the training,
right,
by passing these tests, and every one of these jobs has a fitness test to get through. But then there's phase 2. How was the academy life for you going through the Secret Service?
Yeah, luckily for me, and I say this for me because, we were few women at the time in the Secret Service. We were 9%. So there were 2,000 agents. And so we were 180 women in the service.
And what year was this?
This was 1991.
Okay.
All
right.
And even going down to the academy with lots of other agencies, the Marshals, the State Department, Border Patrol, et cetera, I think even less. I mean, when you look at those agencies, Marshals at the time, very few women, Border Patrol, forget about it, et cetera. I was at the time, and still to this day, but not as much as I was then, I was a huge runner. So Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia.
Yep.
I was in the summer, hot as hell.
Oof, yeah.
My favorite. I was out there running every day, sweating my ass off, 90 minutes, et cetera. People are like, are you kidding me? I'm like, this is the best. That's I'm one of those weird people that loves humidity. And so for me, that distinguished me as that female. Like I at least had some, I got my creds a little bit that way by like not being intimidated by the heat and being out there running all the time. They had these heat warnings at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. So days that we were supposed to be out running, it's like, oh, we can't. And so I would do everything they had us doing. And I'd be like, see you guys, I'm going to go for a run. They're like, what are you doing? I'm like, that's nothing. This is heaven to me. So, I thought the training was fun. I did need to work on things. I worked a little bit in the gym, like on things like my bench, because I didn't really have a ton of upper body strength at the time. I was more a runner. So I did need to work on those things to be able to do, say, the pull up, the push ups, et cetera. But that was easy because I was sort of like a long distance endurance runner. And so it shifted the mentality a little bit to upper body addition.
Yeah, you know what I have found over the years is the folks that come in with a decent running ability, whether you're a cross country runner or you're just an avid runner, you're typically lighter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So picking up those calisthenics and muscle stamina exercises tend to go pretty quickly. Whereas, if you first start out, you might not be that great, but within a month, maybe even 6 weeks, you're just killing everybody around you. So
I loved it. I had to be honest. I really loved it because adding something to my usual routine, I really kind of needed to, stop running as much. So
sure.
Plus one other female that I was training with that was in my class. There were 3 females in the Secret Service class. Her name was Jeannie Wilkins, and she could do more pull-ups than most of the guys, which was number one, amazing. And number 2, an inspiration for me because she was super feminine, but yet there she was just like going at it. And some of the guys weren't so happy about that, but that's what I thought was so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember the time well. I graduated from the Naval Academy in 91, about the same time. And, the women there were just 11 years out from the first women ever graduating from the academy. And you would think a decade it would be better. But no, it was challenging for a lot of them. I mean, I still get, I talked to classmates today that were, actually come up to me and thank me for being nice to them. I was like, what?
Wow.
It's like, really?
Wow.
And they never said anything. They never complained about,
oh, hell no.
What was going on. I had no idea, some of the things that
you don't
were told to
because that's what they're just waiting for you to do, whine and whip.
Yeah. So it's so let's go into your Secret Service life. You seem to be like crushing it. You were like the subject matter expert with anything Spanish, which is smart. It might put you in a box somewhere, but at the same time, you want to, when you're young in a new job, you want to try to, stand up or stand out, and that's one way to do it. So tell me about your life as a Secret Service agent.
Yeah, and I'm going to explain to your audience a little bit about why I became, everything Spanish is. As I said, I had lived in Spain, and while I waited for my 2 applications to process, I was working at a small organization in DC called the Center for Democracy doing election observation missions in Central America, El Salvador, Guatemala. And so continuing to use my Spanish. So when the Secret Service told me, oh yeah, when you were living in Spain, you've traveled so many places, expect your application to take about 2 years to process. Coming back on a trip from El Salvador, spending some time in Miami, called my office. We didn't have cell phones back then, so called from the hotel room. Hey, and they give me my messages. Oh, this guy from the Secret Service called you. And this was about 10 months after I applied, 9-10 months after I applied. And I call and I forget what his name was. And I'm like, hi. And he's like, hey, Mary Beth. And I was like, hi. And he goes, this is so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, thinking like, yeah, what are you going to tell him? Like, and he was all enthusiastic, like kind of off-putting. And he goes, I'm calling to offer you a job with the Secret Service. And I swear I almost fell off the bed because at 10 months or 9-10 months in, I certainly wasn't expecting that.
That was quick.
Yeah, very. And now, so being realistic, 1, female, they had very few of us, they were hiring us, but as I say, and especially along the way, is it's hard to keep us because we're the ones that are leaving to have babies, to get married, to have something more stable, et cetera. So, I knew that. And also my Spanish speaking, just to explain that. And they placed me in the Washington field office. I was living in DC, but just because you're living there doesn't mean that's where you get placed. In fact, of the 5 of us they hired out of the Washington field office, 2 were placed in other offices. So there I am. I was the only Spanish speaker in the Washington field office, which is the epicenter of the Secret Service because of the president, vice president, and their families and all the foreign dignitaries that come through. So, the government can be very frustrating in their lack of common sense. Like we had plenty of Spanish speakers in the Secret Service. They just didn't put any in the Washington field office, where we had, a ton of counterfeit missions going on, investigations, where at the time it was South America that was producing a lot of the counterfeit money.
Right.
And so there's me, brand new agent, being whipped around like, doing undercover stuff, doing counterfeit missions when I'm new, and they put us in the boring check forgery division so that we can learn. And they kept whipping me around to all these things. And these guys would come and say, Mary Beth, I'm going to do an advance for the King of Spain coming in. Will you come with me? I'm like, sure. Like, this was so fun. And I just kept thinking to myself, this is amazing for me. And I got to say, like, a lot of the people that started with me were kind of a little bit envious because they're watching me kind of get a lot of attention because of that. Like, calls would come through from the Washington field office, like, Wilkes, are you available? You need to take a phone call. And for me, it was amazing, the lack of common sense with the government, that it was an advantage to me because it kind of got me known by a lot of different divisions. Mm-hmm. So that's where that subject matter expert comes in. And so, as you know, because you're far enough in my book, my Secret Service career ended quite quickly, about a year and a month into my reign. And I'm going to say to your listeners, you have to read my book to find out why.
Yeah, it's great because it will piss you off. I mean, like I said, I'm still angry right now. I'm about 120, 130 pages into it. And I got to start reading more because I know it gets better. I know it gets better.
Yeah. And we were talking about this before we started the podcast, but you and I both agree everything happens for a reason. And what my life ended up being was a lot more dangerous, which I love, really interesting missions, because I went into what I call the world of contracting. So like kind of have gun will travel, always had a suitcase packed back in the day of having a beeper. I'm in my mid 50s, so we had beepers. And so I literally always had a suitcase packed because, if you didn't answer the beeper and weren't ready to go that day and get on a plane to maybe join an AP, an executive protection team. I remember one guy called like 3 hours later, team was already filled, so it was like, you kind of really had to be on it. And so I kind of bounced back and forth between protection jobs and investigative jobs. One would end, sometimes you'd start a protection job. They say, it's going to be about a week. And then 3 months later, you're still there, which was fun. I really loved that sort of like adventure that I knew was one mission. It's going to end. Whether you love the people or not, you kind of like leave and then you start your next one. And I did that both domestically and internationally, and same with my investigations. And, the book that I wrote is only about my protective missions. And I may or may not write the second book about my investigations, but my style, or what it turned out to be my investigative style, was such, with the exception of one investigation, is no one knew I was the investigator.
Oh,
so for example,
that's impressive.
Well, it's wild because, like I was working for the investigative group in DC, which was it still is pretty reputable. It was started by two guys that worked the Watergate investigation. And I was just that person that would be sent out to like literally go on a plane, sit next to somebody, get information, or sit in an airline lounge and observe somebody because that company thought that he was drinking on the job. And is this guy have issues? Is he a liability? I lived in a house in an unnamed city that I won't say, to become friends with the one neighbor in that neighborhood. Yeah, I know, it's crazy. It made me paranoid. Like, it made me change my seat on the plane all the time. It made me really shift my own behavior. And then the one investigation I worked that they made me say that I was an investigator was, I don't know if you remember the Duke lacrosse scandal.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So 60 Minutes, Ed Bradley, he's now passed, but Ed Bradley was interested in the whole thing. And so they were trying to look for the women that were the two accusers. And I was working then for 60 Minutes to try to find those women with another investigative partner, because in North Carolina, I was not licensed as an investigator, just in the DC area. So they had me paired up with somebody to find those women. So they said, we want you to say that you're an investigator because we're, legit.
Right. Well, that's
Yeah,
fascinating. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
that was
that's
my world after the Secret Service was just like, I'd go from, working a really wealthy family in Sarasota, Florida to, working in Haiti, where I was seeing, macheted bodies on the side of the road and piles of like garbage in any given neighborhood and so much disease and poverty
now you were protecting the president of
of
Haiti,
Haiti.
right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So at the time, going back, this was 1995 when I went down there in November. In almost exactly 1 year earlier, some of your colleagues and some of special forces, they said, so Jean Bertrand Aristide
Oh yeah.
had been ousted
Yep.
and had spent time, I believe it was Venezuela and then the US. And he was living, on the US dollar, this beautiful Georgetown hotel. And Clinton decided that it was time to bring him back. And they thought in 94 that it might be a potential warlike situation, bringing him back to the country. So they sent him down with 21 of U's, former
Yeah.
SEALs, former special forces, couple medics, et cetera. Thankfully, it didn't turn into the shit show they thought it might. So 1 year later, it was a team of 11. And I was brought down by a man named Dave Johnson. He's former Army CID. And he called me one day from the command post and he says, listen, we are training women on this team. Aristide has selected all these people. Some are friends, some are like former taxi drivers, no joke, but this was like this didn't exist before. And so I really think these women need a role model. And I think that the men need to see that women actually are capable and, can fit into this field. Are you interested? Right now, our contract was it's going to be extended. And so I want you to come down as what they call the vacation guy, because all these guys had been working like piecemeal extensions and they didn't want to go home because they wanted the money while the contract was still existing. Once they got the longer term extension, I came down on this sort of trial basis as vacation guy. And I know like it was just gave them the out that they could toss me if I wasn't working out, right? So I go down there and within a couple weeks of being there, one of the guys quit. And that's actually an interesting story. And it was because of my existence. The wife didn't want him to be working with a female, whatever.
Wow.
My game
Yeah,
was
you guys had a lot of that too. I forgot
you know
all
what I
about
mean?
that.
So
Yeah.
I was 10 guys and me at the time. So we were a team of 11, 10 guys and me. So we were a combination of, there was a former State Department agent, Army CID, Air Force, 2 special forces medics. No SEALs had continued on. I think it just became boring for them, to be honest. And they offered me the job once that guy quit. And I was like, okay. So I stayed there about 8.5 months, could have stayed longer. They were paring down the team. I decided, I got to be honest, because of some of the antics of my colleagues with the local women, amongst other things. I just was like, you know what? One day I'm sitting in the command post as, shots are being fired. I'm recording that. I had seen a witch burning because they believed in voodoo and Catholicism. And I remember one day someone says to me, Wilkes, you got to come out here and I got to show you something. And there were this person, 4 tires, gasoline doused on them, and then just burning because that person had been deemed a witch. That's the voodoo facet. And nothing we could do about it outside the gates of the palace. Not anything that was threatening the president. And I just sat there one day in the command post. I'm like, you know what? I got to get out of this industry. Like, I know this sounds however it sounds, but like, I'm too smart for this. Like, it's time to go back to grad school.
There are some things that are hard to see.
And hard to deal with as far as colleagues that you go, are they going to have my 6 if I'm out in the field when they're, too busy drinking like a gallon of booze the night before and they're like shaking the next day, So I made I let them know I was going to be leaving. And they're like, listen, the team's going to be pared down. We'd really like you to stay. And I got to be honest, like, again, I kind of go, oh, they're just doing that because I'm a woman and they think I might sue them. You know what I mean? Type kind of thing. I'm like, nope, good. You guys hire who you want. I'm going back to graduate school. And just made that decision. And it took me a year to get into school because this is where I got my master's in forensic psychology, because I hadn't studied psychology undergrad. So I needed a couple more classes. So that's, I worked another job in between that. But, that was, that's my sort of distinction of as the only female that ever protected a number one, a president outside of the US was through
Nice.
that contract. Yeah. Yeah.
So how old were you when you decided to go back to school?
For my master's, I was about 10 years out of undergrad, so about 32.
Okay.
I was
And so
not,
you were working full time, going to school?
no, I
Oh,
dropped everything. I got out of the field, which was a little
okay.
bit of a transition, and did I started in January and ended in just like September, October, like a 2 year, like 3 semesters and then an internship. They called an externship. Where I worked in the stalking unit of victim services of Queens Criminal Court. So it was almost a full 2 years, and that was in New York City. It was the John College of
Oh
Criminal
yeah.
Justice.
Yeah. No, well. Yeah.
So yeah, I did that. That's kind of where I get my sort of forensic psychology expertise. I worked in the field of stalking and domestic violence. And when I graduated from that, I moved to San Diego because I was like, you know what? This is again 1998, and not a big, stalking still wasn't illegal in every state. So I was like, okay, this is a new field. If you're any idiot can make, a niche sort of business out of it. And I decided I could live anywhere. I'm like, okay, I've always wanted to live in San Diego. Now's the time.
Great place.
So yeah. Oh God, heaven. I know you know that. And so, yeah, I moved to San Diego and sort of just started working in the field. And then 9/11 happened.
Now, real quick, were you working for yourself? Were you being entrepreneurial here?
Yeah, I was doing a lot of speaking engagements. I was actually still kind of, oh gosh, this is this is one of the investigations I worked so in my second or third semester, studying my master's program, forensic psychology, somebody back from the day when I was working in Dallas came and visited me in New York and said, and I knew there was an ulterior motive. He's like, oh, I'm going to be in New York. I just want to, take you out to dinner, see how you're doing. And then as we're walking along the streets in New York, he says to me, so I have a proposal for you. I'm like, okay, I knew this was coming. And I don't want to say too much, but he said, I want you to work this investigation. I know you're going to school. You can do it at your pace. You can do it whenever you're available, blah, blah, blah. And I ended up doing like this every second or third week, flying to Dallas to watch some people. And then that's where I ended up moving into that house to befriend some people, to kind of see their motives, their actions, their behaviors, et cetera, and know that this particular group of people / family were not in danger. So I was still doing that while I was making my name in, the world of stalking and domestic violence. And I got to sit on the stalking case assessment team, which I thought was pretty prestigious in San Diego. I was doing a lot of speaking on women's issues and stalking, and it was awesome. And then 9/11 happened, so I graduated my program at the end of 99. So almost 2 years later, 9/11 happens. And I end up, calling all these different organizations in New York, volunteering my psych services, thinking it's the least I can do for the country, sort of I'll do my patriotic duty. Didn't fly. Like everyone kept saying, I called the Red Cross. They're like, oh, we really appreciate it, but we have an abundance of volunteers. Try this organization, try this organization. I called about 5 organizations. Everyone kind of said the same, which says a lot for New York. People volunteering didn't need me, which is kind of amazing, right? So I ended up taking a position with the Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program, which was a US State Department program that had existed since the Marine barracks bombing in Lebanon. But they were expanding and building this huge academy in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I had been offered the job several months earlier, and it was not supposed to start till October, which I just think is a bizarre timing. I know.
Yeah.
It was about a month after 9/11, which I just thought it wasn't going to happen. I thought, oh, this is the world's a shit show right now. And the first class was from Bangladesh, which is a little too close to where a lot of the 9/11 team came from, right? So, but it happened. And a month after 9/11, I did that. I was like, okay, if this is the way I'm going to serve the country, this is the way I'm going to serve the country. And I became an instructor in VIP protection.
Oh, nice.
Through that program. And I did that for a year and a half. And about that time, 3 months earlier, one of my colleagues from that team had burned out, and he went for a temporary job in Bogota, Colombia, under the auspices of the US Embassy. and they were expanding the contract. And he's like, I'm sitting there one Monday, and walks the RSO, the regional security officer, which is a State Department agent, for if your audience doesn't know. They're in charge of the, not just the security of the embassy, but also for Americans in country, et cetera. And Bogota, or Colombia at the time, was the kidnap capital of the world, and everybody knows their drug history. And he goes, I'm sitting there at a Monday morning meeting, and in walks the RSO. And he goes, okay, everybody, I know this is this is like an impossibility. This is a unicorn, but does anybody know a female that speaks Spanish, that's a former federal agent, that might be willing to come down to Bogota? And this guy, Tom, has his mouth full of breakfast. He's like, and next thing you know, I'm offered this job as the U.S. security advisor to the vice president and minister of defense of Colombia. The ambassador at the time was female. The minister of defense at the time was a female. So you can imagine her as a minister of defense of Colombia in 2003 is not only very male dominated, the Ministry of Defense, but also she and the president ran on this huge agenda of killing corruption. And you can imagine how in the military, how many of those generals, I hate to say it, but it's just true, wanted her gone. So they felt that she was actually in more danger than the president, and she was my main focus. So yeah, that was my big, that was definitely my most dangerous mission, my most challenging. We handled a massive budget with just the two of us. Then we added a third person a year later. Sorry. We added a third advisor about 6 months into mine, because the ambassador said to me, listen, Mary Beth, I know Marta Lucia, she was the Minister of Defense, and she's currently the vice president of the country. I know Marta Lucia is a job unto itself. Just work both of these for a while, write me a cable, and I promise you I'll get you a third advisor. And she kept to her word. So then we turned out to be 3 advisors. And a year later, we started an academy because we got an influx of budget money. And we wanted to build an academy, which was the ideal. It eventually happened. But in the meantime, we used their sort of what was equivalent to the FBI. And we started an academy to train all the people because their training sucked.
So you basically were doing like a foreign internal defense mission down there for personal protection?
Yeah. So my first year was solely 1000% focused on Marta Lucia Ramirez, the Minister of Defense, and for about 6 months, the vice president. And then once we added the training aspect, I just balanced those two as best I could. So we did bound from still helping her out. And what we did was I would go on missions with her, observe her team. I was not, her protection agent. I was observing her protection team there in Bogota, wherever she was traveling. And then I would make recommendations, and we would discuss with the budget money what we were going to buy for them. Weapons. We did buy some armored vehicles, radios. I mean, even little things like digital cameras and office equipment, because they didn't have squad.
Wow.
So even some clothing from all those, Cabela's and all those places that you buy at some military style, like khakis. And I got to be honest, they didn't even have ammunition. So we bought weapons, we bought ammunition, and then we just shifted. Even though we continued with that mission, our focus then for me, I was down there 2.5 years. My next year and a half was and I was starting to get bored. You can see from my career that I get bored and I like to try new things. And right at that year mark, when we shifted to a training mission, I was literally going to quit. I'm like, how many times can I tell these people this is what they need to do? I've been doing it for a year and I get bored, right? Listening to myself. So once we started the training mission, I said, okay, I'll stay until I train every single person on the president's team, the vice president's team, and the Minister of Defense's team. And that was a 1.5 year effort. And that was awesome. And then I did that. So my total was 2.5 years. Me and my 3 teammates, we all had bounties on our head. I never told my parents that, of course.
I'm sure.
Yeah. One day we got called into the embassy to the 3rd floor, and we're like, oh, we need to talk to you. And I'm like, okay. It was kind of this weird, ominous thing. They're like, so, you guys, what you do is kind of gotten around the country, blah, blah, blah. And essentially because it was really not just us, but it was anybody who was keeping the administration alive, because the FARC, there were 3 different, the ELN, there were 3 different terrorist organizations, but the FARC was the biggest. And, they did not want Uribe, that was the president at the time, alive, because they were killing it as far as taking those guys down. The kidnapping, the drugs. Uribe made an incredible impact on that. And so they weren't happy about that. Now, listen, they barely exist anymore because of him and, subsequent. But so we were, in higher danger, but it's like, oh, they're like, you really need to up your, I don't know, vigilance. And I was like, kind of do that every day. And we were driving, I'd pull out of my apartment building every morning in a level 5 armored vehicle, and then go pick up my colleagues, and we'd, cruise to work. And it's kind of just what we did, and I know this, it was the mission, and you accept the mission. And listen, during the time I was in Colombia, and I know this, you remember the 3 Blackwater guys that got hung and burned from the bridge in Fallujah. Yeah. So I call up my parents and I say, listen, because remember the family sued and it was like a total shit show. And I call up my parents. I was like, listen, if anything happens to me down here, I want you to know something. I have every piece of equipment that I need to do my job. Please do not make an international incident. Like, we are good. I promise you, like, please, like, I am good. We've never been denied anything, but don't let that freak you out. So it was a very interesting conversation with my parents.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Mm-hmm. My mom was none too happy with my career.
Well, when did she start settling down? Like, when was she like happy with some of your career decisions?
When I went back for my doctorate and really got out of the field.
And how many years was that from 2003?
Well, I didn't go back for my doctorate, Stu, until 2008.
Okay. So you got 5 more years of bouncing around doing investigations and protective details.
Yep.
So how many countries have you been to?
There was one time, a few years ago, my husband and I were sort of comparing who had been to more places. He won, but we're pretty close. I still have a few on my bucket list. I'm going to Croatia in August. So that'll be
beautiful.
Yeah. I don't remember. I wish I had it in front of me, but I don't know at this point, but lots. Africa. I haven't hit Australia. I've hit most of the continents.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been really lucky, both mission wise, and I'm a huge traveler. So like when I was in Bogota, I went to Chile for 3 weeks.
Nice.
Because I had a ton of comp time, and I'm like, I'm using it. So yeah, because there was a time when we were contractors that we were paid like all of our hours, and then they converted us to State Department employees for a number of reasons. They wanted to give us diplomatic passports so that we had more immunity because of what was going on, and other reasons as well. And so the number of hours we were allowed to get paid got chomped down, but we got comp time. So I was like, well, I'll go to Chile for 3 weeks and get paid while, if I'm not going to, and if I'm not going to get paid the hours, on a contractor's basis, I'll take it traveling.
Sure. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, that's so exciting. So tell me this, what made you decide to go back to school and go with psychology and get the PhD in psychology? Because your background, I mean, yes, there's psychology in everything that we do.
Sure.
But what was the interest there?
Okay. So here we go. This is the independent woman speaking. So just so your audience understands, when I met my now husband, I was 40 or 41. So I didn't get married till like a week after my 43rd birthday. So I'm living in San Diego. I meet Mike, my husband, who's a former Navy SEAL. I know you guys know of each other. And we end up deciding to merge lives on the East Coast because he had his daughter for the first 5 years. She was 6 at the time. And of course, wanted to be involved in her life. So we decided we're going to merge lives on the East Coast, which was just outside Philly in an area called Bucks County. And so I had my house. I had a beautiful house in San Diego that I had bought maybe a year or 2 earlier. And I was like, wait a minute, like, I'm making this decision for a man, this is a 40-year-old woman who's always been, super independent. And So I made this decision that if I was working at the time as the COO of an investigative firm, and I had part ownership, being vested over time. And I made this decision to merge lives with Mike, but that meant I lost my position and I lost my equity. So I was like, okay, like, what am I thinking? I'm doing all this for some guy, right? So I move and I was like, okay, this is it. I've got to do something for me. And it was either have a child
Mhm.
or go get a doctorate. And I was like, I'm choosing the doctorate because I was older and that wasn't good timing for me. And so I made the decision to pursue a doctorate, probably about, because we merged lives in January and we got married about 6 months later. And then I started my doctoral program a couple months after that. So I did, that was a 5-year program, like most doctoral programs. And I graduated in 2012. So I've only been a doctor of clinical psychology for under 10 years.
Mm.
Yeah. So that was the big decision. It had been in the back of my mind, but I wasn't sure I was ever ready to make that 5-year commitment. And it sucked. I got to be honest. It sucked.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I look at those, paths, towards those kind of degrees, and I'm like, oof, do I?
Older, right? So it wasn't like,
Yeah.
I mean, having been a student again, like 10 years earlier when I was getting my master's, but yeah, well, the kids, and I call them kids because there were some that I was as old as their parents, were out like going to the baseball game and partying. I was like, are you kidding me? I'm like reading all weekend because this is so onerous for me, But listen, it's done, and I have my
Nice.
doc.
Congrats. Yeah, that's another big hurdle, to
Yeah, thank you.
to get. So how did that change your life? How have the last 10 years changed
Yeah,
for you
yeah.
with what you're doing now?
So after I got my doctorate, it was Widener University, just south of Philly. Mike and I moved to Connecticut, and because it was closer to Isabella, my stepdaughter, because we had her every Friday. We picked her up from school and took her back Mondays. And we had her summers and blah, blah, blah. So we just wanted to facilitate that and have more access. So that's where I did my postdoc work, at a sort of child adolescent centered place. I then took a leave of absence. My mom was sick at the time and she's since passed. But I decided, okay, I think it's time for me to study to get my psychology license, because that's like the last hurdle you need to do once you graduate. And I'm going to write that book. And I ended up writing the book. Probably, it took me a year. It took longer to get it published, but that's a whole nightmare story, like a lot of authors have. But so that changed things. And then we moved to Maryland because Mike started a company and Bella came with us. And so here was me. We moved like August, and I got Bella into school. Mike's all settled at work. And then I go, oh shit, like, what about me? What am I going to do? I hadn't even thought about that. Right. So I started tossing my resume out, now in the DC area, there's tons of universities. So I started distributing my resume to both psychology departments and criminal justice departments.
Nice.
And University of Maryland picked me up for a semester for what was called adult psychopathology. Really, it was a one and done. It was the professor that usually taught it got pulled to teach a graduate program, and we need you. And I proposed like all these classes, but they're a public university, didn't have the budget. So I was like, oh shit, and I got to put my resume out again. George Washington University picked me up to teach pretty much the same course, but it's called abnormal psychology. And this was very cool for me about GW. Not only did I really like it quite a bit more as far as teaching and the level of student, but I proposed to teach a class called The Psychology of Crime and Violence. I mean, it makes sense for somebody with my background.
Sure.
And the head of the psychology department said, hey, I get it. Like, you're super qualified, but you're an adjunct professor. And we don't usually make new courses for adjuncts because we don't want orphan classes, right? People that like abandon ship and then nobody can teach the class anymore. But let me see, what I can do. But I was thinking, oh, it's not going to happen. And I totally get the rationale. Like, maybe a week later, the guy writes me and says, how does fall, like the next fall sound? I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Like, yes. So nice. I taught that for twice, because each fall I was supposed to teach it this fall, but I moved a year ago when COVID hit to Santa Fe, New Mexico. which was the plan for the summer. We just kind of moved it up when COVID hit. And, I got 2 semesters more out of it teaching. And this fall, they're 100% in person, which I'm 1,000% behind. Like, they need to be in person. They need to get back to life. And they're making some exceptions for people to learn remotely, but they aren't fully remote classes.
Right.
So that's kind of, my life became all about psychology, and I have a whole, bunch of corporate clients and some pro bono clients. I do trainings in what's called mental health first aid for a large corporation. I still, believe it or not, still consult in the world of threat assessment, stalking. I just was talking to someone the other day about, some ways to build their team for a security thing. So it's not like I've ever fully been out of the world of security, partially, or maybe mostly, because I was a female back then in the private sector that was if the Secret Service had a small percentage, the private sector was next to nothing.
Yeah.
And so I was really a unicorn for a long time. And still getting lots, especially since my book came out, I've gotten a lot of opportunity to sort of like re-dive into the security world.
So how was the writing process for you? Getting this, sitting down and actually writing your book. How was that? Because I know that's always a challenge for writers.
2 words, it sucked. I'm not, as I say to people, I'm not a writer. I just have a story to tell. And so this is kind of funny. When I sat down to write the book, I really wanted it to be my full story, meaning I would have had everything about my investigations as well. But I wrote so many pages, 600, about my protection missions, that it became its own beast. And okay, there it is. Yeah. That's actually the second cover. There was an original cover. Let me see if I can find it. Let me give me a second. So the original cover, if you can see this, looked like this. Can you see that?
Oh, okay, got it.
Yep. Yeah, it doesn't matter. But the people I started working with were like, listen, your original cover is fine for like the industry, but it's not attractive to mainstream. Oh, you got my website up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I ended up, it really was tough for me because I don't know, like I ended up, and this is where my editors were like, oh my God, like a lot of my stuff was just like bullet points. Like, let me tell you a story through bullet points. And my editors, who I think made magic out of my words, pared things down from 600 and something to whatever the book is now, to whatever it is, 200 or,
600 pages. Wow.
Oh,
man.
It was insane, Stu.
Good Lord.
Yeah. So they made magic out of that and created what is sitting there today on Amazon. And I may or may not hit that second book. That would be, so this is called The Protector. It's got that long subtitle.
Yeah.
The next one, if it's written, will be The Investigator with some kind of subtitle.
I love it.
Yes. Yeah.
No, that's a great book. My son is actually considered, he's going to University of Maryland this year.
All right.
As a freshman. And that's where my daughter went too. And he's considering a similar path.
All right.
As
we'll have some conversations.
Like Secret Service and
okay.
Criminology, psychology, things like that. So
yeah, I think we'll have to have a couple of conversations.
Yeah. So anyway, I got him your book. So he's
thank you.
Yeah, so he's gonna check that out as well.
Yeah.
So for you, what is next? What's next for you? Do you have something on the horizon? I know you've got this book, you got consulting still doing, you're teaching. Is it just a continued journey of that?
That's a great question, because when the book was literally published last April, so we know, COVID hit March. I had this whole launch thing planned at George Washington University. That's sort of like and I hate to say it because some people would find this offensive, but that's really the only thing that affected me with COVID, was like, kind of thought I'd already be on the book, speaking sort of circuit, whatever. Woe is me. You know what I mean? Well, right. I don't really think that type of thing is going to be in full swing till next spring. And that's probably at the earliest. Yes, some people are starting to go back to office buildings, but like even talking to my corporate clients, it's like, well, we can go back, but we don't have to go back. And a lot of people aren't going back. And, so I don't think like, huge speaking in person. I've done a bunch of Zoom stuff, but I don't think the in-person speaking thing like I'd like to do, because I think part of the appeal is sort of like my physical presence. I'm in very good shape for someone who's in their mid 50s. I am funny. I think I'm funny. I'm more approachable than a lot of people would think with my background. And, it may continue to be like Zoom things, but with me finding out that I'm 90% sure I won't be teaching in the fall unless they decide to change their minds last minute, but I don't think so. I was like, well, I am traveling in August. So when school hits is when it will really be sort of like, okay, now what? So is it write the second book, which is a possibility? I already have an outline.
Yeah.
There's something here in New Mexico that I've always thought about once I knew we were going to move here is psychologists don't prescribe medications. Psychiatrists that are
Right.
medical doctors write prescriptions. In about 5 states, at least that's the last count, there might be more at this time, New Mexico being one of them. There are 5 states, I think, in this country where psychologists are allowed to prescribe, because what it is we have so much rural area where there is such a paucity of services that there was such an underserved population. And so they allow people here, psychologists here, you have to do the certification,
Sure.
which is huge. And so I've thought about that, not to be able to prescribe as much as having the knowledge, because they have tons of clients, as you can imagine, and even teaching a lot of students that are on medication. And I mean, I know like a very surface knowledge of what those medications do, but I would like the knowledge of understanding a little bit more about, modes of action, all the new stuff that's out there, what it's doing. Listen, when I first started learning about medication, there was one ADHD medication that was Ritalin.
Right.
Now there's such a huge world of medications for ADHD.
And it's crazy. I mean, not only the number of options people have, but the dosing options. And I mean, all of that opens up a whole different chapter to learn.
Yeah, and learning that, just because a drug isn't working doesn't mean you always up the medication. Sometimes you lower the dosage, like you're saying. And so that's a possibility that would really skyrocket my insurance because of the liability. But the knowledge would be really, so I have to say, like you asked me, I'm kind of giving you the long-winded story. I don't know.
It's fascinating.
I don't know.
No, I love interviewing people like you because, you have a growth mindset. Like you are constantly growing. You're constantly evolving. Never
reinvention.
never letting the grass grow under your feet. And just constantly moving. So and I think that's a healthy way to live. It's all right.
Yeah, I appreciate, the fact that I don't let anything stop me. Listen, I'm 56. I just turned 56. I'm still like hungry for that next thing. And I feel fortunate, that that's the case because, some of my friends are retired, or, just haven't had a career, whatever. But I'm just like, I always feel like I have to be a productive member of society in some way, shape, or form, because I was given these gifts and I spent a lot of years educating myself. So I want to put that to use, and I just don't really know what that's going to look like. But fortunately, unlike, my husband is like a massive planner. I'm kind of like, it's always worked out for me, and I don't really have to think too hard about it. Something will happen. It'll work out.
I like that. You seem to have a little less anxiety whenever you not trying to plan everything.
Yeah, because best laid plans, right?
I mean, we plan, God laughs. Well, tell me this. This is sometimes it's a difficult question.
Okay.
For people that are busy, are constantly growing. Where are you at your most content?
On a daily basis, having had my coffee and having gotten my workout done. And then I feel like I could do anything, like keep me, busy till 2 a.m, but make sure I get my coffee and my workout. My workouts are, I get grumpy if I don't get my workout in.
Same.
I know. Yeah. It happens, but then you kill yourself the next day to make up for it, whatever. On a wider basis, I think it's, knowing that everybody in my family, and I mean Mike and Isabella and my siblings, knowing they're okay. You know, I spend a lot of time with family and friends still. Like I do a lot of pro bono cases with, like I'm talking to one of my cousin's wives later today because shit happens in life and COVID has affected people differently. So I spend a lot of time talking to people about psychology challenges, I'll call them, mental health issues, et cetera, which I enjoy. Sometimes can be really hard because, you know, kind of letting people know what may or may not be going on can be difficult, especially if they're talking about a child that they're concerned about.
Sure.
So really, you know, it's that, and it's, you know, connecting with friends, you know, positive relationships is huge. Um, PS, you know, for especially over the past year and a half. So that's, I would say, you know, and then I think what also makes me happy is knowing like my next trip. You know, I'm a huge traveler and I'm a great planner. I kind of, you know, always coordinate my family reunions, which happen every year. My trip to Croatia coming up is like insane, and 2 weeks of like going all over the place, doing really cool things with a girlfriend. We always travel to Europe together. She's a girlfriend from college, and you know, just it seemed it's I think for me very simple things because of the craziness that I've lived. You know, that a workout, coffee, and travel, and friends and family are just, you know, I was raised in the Midwest, and I think my family values
That's what grounds you.
100%.
I love it. I
Mhm.
love it. Well, thank you so much.
This has been so fun.
I appreciate this a lot. And where can people find out about you? I know I went to Amazon and to your website, but
Yeah, my book's on Amazon, and you can also find my book on the website, which is Dr. Mary Beth, drmarybeth.com. And then you can email me there. You can email at mb@drmarybeth.com, which is mb@drmarybeth.com. I do lots of consults. I do speaking engagements. I'm right now in the midst of about a half a dozen, which is nice. I think things are picking up. Doing some something called a master class. Again, sort of got pulled back into my former life, as I say, for a master class in protection. So I'll be talking about stalking, as you can imagine, both more in the private sector of people that are being stalked. And so I'm doing 3 modules. I'm calling it 101, 201, and 301. So it's the basics, the perpetrator, and the victim. So, you know, I'm kind of doing a lot of different things, which I love, as you can imagine. I love the variety. And, you know, anybody that wants to contact me, I get lots of inquiries through that. I've gotten inquiries through LinkedIn.
okay.
Yeah, Mary Beth Wilkes Janke on LinkedIn, Facebook. I have my Facebook page, you know, Dr. Mary Beth, and Instagram as well. But I got to tell you, being in my mid-50s, some of the social media stuff is like over my head.
Oh, I get it. I get it for sure. Well, you know what I'll do? What I will do for you is in the description of this video and the audio that will be on where people can get their podcasts, I'll put all your links to
Oh, thank you.
how they can get in touch with you, whether it's social
Awesome.
media or websites and Amazon,
Yeah,
things like that.
thank you.
Absolutely. So once again, this is another 2 Through and After with Dr. Mary Beth Janke. I appreciate your time so much. You really contributed and made
Yeah,
made
thanks
this
for
little
having me.
you made
Yeah.
this series completely different from what it has been, and
Oh, good,
I
good.
really appreciate the journey that you have done. Thank you for your service
Oh,
and
thank you.
continued service, and you know, best of luck to you and Mike
Thanks, Stu.
and you know, what's next.
Fun. Yeah, we'll see.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Remember, check out drmarybeth.com before um, and get that book too. It's a really good book.
Thank
All right.
you.
We're out. Thank you.